bunch of really big global problems, and we're trying to think about how can we use all of the talent we've got in the room, the ideas we have in the room, the skills, the money that we have in the room to try to solve these problems. So we've heard a couple of the challenges already. Earlier today we were talking a little bit about biodiversity challenges. We've just heard about ocean challenges. We've got Carolyn now who's going to talk a little bit more about wildlife challenge. So if I pass over to you, Carolyn, just before we get into the panels.
Sure. Does anyone have a microphone they could lend me? Thank you.
As if by magic. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carolyn Cadman. I'm Chief Exec of Cornwall Wildlife Trust, which I understand from Melissa today, coincidentally, is 60 years old this year, as much as this, which is the same as Gould Hilly. So maybe we should have some joint celebrations because we share some land interest on the lizard. Cornwall Wildlife Trust is one of 46 wildlife trusts. So wherever you're from in the country, there is a wildlife trust that needs your help and support. So you're very welcome to join Cornwall Wildlife Trust whilst you're here. It's very easy online, but go and have a look at the local trust and see what they're up to. Cornwall is beautiful. Look at those pictures. We've got our own resident pod of bottlenose dolphins that live in the inshore waters in Cornwall. We've got many nature reserves, the countryside is beautiful, the coasts are beautiful, and we've got some wonderful conservation success stories. That's a chart on the bottom right, which were absent in Cornwall for 40 years, and now they're back, thanks to conservation efforts. But, as Robin Teverson said earlier, the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries, and Cornwall mirrors that trend. We set out as a Wildlife Trust with the University of Exeter and Cornwall Council 18 months ago to find out what the state of nature in Cornwall was. And to be honest, it's a report that we've written, but it's quite a depressing read because species are in decline here. They're under threat from agriculture, intensive agriculture. They're under threat from intensive fishing, development. Climate change is impacting on kittiwakes, for example. There's pollution, and our freshwater management, the way in which we're managing water and how it crosses the land, is really impacting on our wildlife. So, what we're going to do about it, there is good news. There are lots of people who want to do something about it, and hopefully some of you, or all of you in the room, want to do something about reversing the decline of nature. Cornwall Wildlife Trust's overall ambition is to do exactly that, to reverse the decline of nature. How are we going to do that? Two main strands of our work. One is that, along with many other organisations, Cornwall Council and others nationally, we want to see at least 30% of our land, of our rivers and our seas managed for nature's recovery. And we do that in two ways. One, we buy land and we manage it as a nature reserve. So currently, I'm a proud custodian of 0.66% of Cornwall, which is a nature reserve, and I want to own and create more habitat and more land. So again, if you want to donate to help me do that, that would be great. But the other thing we do in partnership with local landowners and farmers is that we influence. So we have staff who go out and give farm advice and influence how land is managed. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing we're aiming to do is to get 1 in 4 people taking action for nature. And that can mean community level action, it can mean you as a consumer, but it can also mean you as an important decision maker or a business or company. So we want to see more people taking action for nature. And this is where, I guess, data and intelligence comes into it. So we already use Sentinel information from the European Space Agency. That's the lizard on the screen there, and you can see that it's a bit hard to see anything meaningful on that. So we sometimes use the different lenses through which you can view that data. That helps to tell us a bit more about the land. But when you're dealing with a nature reserve that can be, say, 10 hectares or 20 hectares big, the satellite data becomes less useful in helping you to take conservation management decisions. So we use other means. We've started using drones and using that to inform our decision making. which is better than aircraft or satellite information. But fundamentally, we root back to humans as being the thing that takes a judgment based on the information that we see through our eyes and feel under our feet. So that's the challenge that I'm open to ideas on. How can everything that we're talking about today, how can mapping help to, it's not just mapping, Earth intelligence, help to inform conservation decision making, everyday decision making of people to reverse the decline of nature?
Perfect, great. So we've got our third challenge there, and then we've also got fourth challenge we're going to look at to the council for. So, sorry, getting first turn. So Richard Pears, do you want to, you can have this chair?
Oh, I didn't realise I
Ready
was
to do it for you? Well, just a chance to be able to talk about how all this relates back to the challenges you guys are trying to tackle at the council.
Oh, come in.
That has to be the mic.
Someone would be kind enough to give me a mic. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm Councillor Richard Pears. I'm very fortunate in that not only am I the cabinet member for customers for Cornwall Council, I'm also the Mayor of St Austell. So I'm sat here just up the road from where I live, attending a space conference. And I can tell you that as a kid from Penrice School, if you told me we'd be having space conferences up here, we'd be building our own spaceport, it was unimaginable. I mean, I don't know if there's how many other people are that are local to this area, but I mean, what we're doing down here in Cornwall is absolutely cutting edge, and it is an absolute privilege to be sat here with everybody else up on this stage discussing the kind of things we're working on right now. Now, Cornwall Council, we've been batting back and forwards, and I've been talking to various people here today about the data needs of Cornwall Council. We are a massive, massive organisation, and just to give you an idea how big a question this is, I always find it very useful to sort of gauge what people think about a local council, for instance. Who here, if you know the answer, don't shout out because it kind of ruins this bit. But if you don't know, someone have a guess. What do you think the budget of Cornwall Council is every year? How much of your money do you think we spend every year? Please shout out. Come on, go for it. How many million? Anyone? Give it a shot. Come on. 50 million quid a year. Flipping hell, that's a big organisation. Do I hear more than 50? Anyone?
150.
150 million. Wow. More or less, anyone think that's accurate, good, right?
2 billion.
We're a £2 billion organisation. 2,000 million every year. We're the biggest local authority in the entire country. And so what Cornwall Council, the advantage that I feel we really bring to the table down here is you've actually got the backing of an absolutely massive organisation which employs over 7,000 people around Cornwall, and also owns several of Cornwall's biggest companies, including Cllr, which is running Newquay Airport, and of course the spaceport. We are involved in an awful lot, and we are absolutely adamant that science and technology, and especially space, is the future for this county. This enables us to capture vast amounts of data. And so as I've been talking to people here today about what kinds of things we'd be interested in, our problem is that our answer is everything. I mean, we do everything from environmental monitoring, ports, harbours, bridges, traffic flows, building. We're interested in monitoring sewage outfalls into the sea. We're interested in monitoring fishing boats, traffic flows, population on beaches, dog walkers. We don't know what we want to monitor because we need to monitor everything. But because this is such a new technology for everyone, we aren't even aware of how in depth we can get with things. We're still monitoring air quality by setting up air quality monitoring stations. Can we do all that from satellite? I mean, if the answer is yes, then we can save ourselves an awful lot of time and trouble. I've just been talking to people here today who were explaining, I was saying, well, we can't monitor that because, of course, when it gets cloudy, you can't see it. And they said, oh, no, we just, bounce radar through it or use IR, not a problem. So all of the things that we would like to do with this data, we're not even aware of all the possibilities or the different ways of going about it. And that's why meetings like today are so important to us. I mean, it really is an opportunity for us to bring forward one of the most cutting-edge councils, I believe, anywhere in the world. And this is where I need to speak to what we can do for you, because we are sitting on terabytes and terabytes of data that will be as useful to you as your data collection abilities are to us. So what I'm pledging to do as a data lead in the council is to create an accessible data warehouse where you guys can feed data into us, but you can also access data back from us. We're going to create the biggest IT project that any local government authority in this entire country has ever done, and we are going to make our data accessible to you, and we want to be feeding in as much Earth observation data into our facilities as possible. We want to use this, we want to engage with you, and that's what I pledge that we will be doing. I mean, I better fire off a few questions just to the panel, but I just wanted to finish by saying Cornwall is a place where dreams really do come true. I mean, if 5 years ago you'd said we were going to build a spaceport, everyone would have said you were mad, and yet we're building it. If you'd said 2 years ago that we were going to build our own satellite, then of course you couldn't. I mean, it was a crazy idea with too many whiskies, and yet here we sit 2 years later, we're building it. When I go around the country and I talk about Cornwall and our space aspirations, the first thing everybody says to me is, oh, so you guys are going to launch a pasty into space, are you? To which I answer, no, we did that 5 years ago. First pasty in space was 2017. We're way ahead of that. We are going to land a pasty on the moon by the end of the decade. That's where we're going. Thank you very much.
I'm just curious, before we get into talking to the panel, in the audience today, how many people, put your hands up if you are coming at it from a private sector, or you have a business or a startup? Great, perfect. So one of the, I know you're not on the panel, but I do have a question for you real quick.
That's why I wasn't sure if I was sitting here.
You are now. So if there are private sector businesses out here, startups especially, oftentimes they're not quite sure where to go to get into the council, who to talk to, how to access that data, or maybe that £1 billion budget, that type of thing. Where do they get started?
Talk to me.
Great. All right. Your inbox. Perfect. Cool.
I'll sort it for you.
All right, great. Well, so now we've got 4 challenges that we've looked at today. We've got Biodiversity and Nature Challenge. We're looking at, oh God, double mic, sorry. We've got Wildlife Challenge. We've got Oceans that need our help. And we've got People and Society and all of this data mountain that the council's sitting on that we can do things with. I'd like to kind of open it up to the room now. It's not just for the panelists, but also all of you business owners out there who might have something you're working on, an innovation you're developing, services that you're providing that could help these challenges. We want to have a conversation around it. So we do have a few people that have time constrictions. So I kind of want to start with the oceans problem that we talked about and that was presented earlier. I'm just wondering, in terms of all of those challenges and difficulties we've got going on with the oceans, is there anything that anybody on the panel was inspired to think about? Okay, here's this technology we could use to help solve it, or here's something where we can start to have a helpful conversation about it. Or anyone in the room have cool stuff you're working on? Yeah, that might help. Sorry, I jumped right ahead. Some of them have already talked today, so I kind of figured you guys knew them, but if I just pass it around, you guys recap.
So I'm Richard Flemmings, Chief Technology Officer at 4AI. I won't introduce myself again, so you've just seen me speak for 15 minutes on.
My name is Jamie. I'm a researcher at the University of Exeter, and ocean health is one of the things I focus on. I am Geach. I'm a professor of astrophysics at the University of Hertfordshire. What's astrophysics got to do with Earth observation? Well, I just think of astrophysics as the ultimate remote sensing challenge. Over the past few years, I've been getting into thinking about applying the techniques we've developed in astrophysics to Earth observation data, and that's led to the formation of Aspia Space, a new company. It's going to be a neighbour of Richard's tomorrow. And we're really thinking about new ways of approaching Earth observation data to solve the sorts of problems we've been talking about today.
Thanks. In case you've forgotten, I'm Carolyn from Cornwall Council.
Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Lavender. I'm the head of Net Zero at the Satellite Applications Catapult. My role is focused on the commercialisation of capabilities in our sector, and my strategies are focused on sectoral challenges in net zero.
Hi, I'm Dr. Samantha Lavender. So I run a company called Pixalytics, and I've been working in space for about 30 years, of which 20 now is in commercial sector running companies. So we use satellite Earth observation data for environmental challenges. And I think one of the amazing things nowadays is, I mean, you can be a micro company, in our case based in Devon rather than Cornwall, but work all over the world with people. So normally in the morning I'm in conversations with people in Australia and Singapore, and in the afternoon I'm in conversations with NASA and people in the US and Canada on projects. And I don't even have to travel, I just have to use Zoom nowadays. But it is nice to visit places sometimes.
I'm still Richard Pears. Thank you.
Perfect. So going back to the panel, a couple of you are already thinking about how you're using data to try to solve some of these challenges. Maybe it's worth hearing if there's anything you've worked on particularly that's helped with either the oceans problem or some of the other challenges that we've put up. Yeah, please.
So I have been very busy actually over the last couple of months. So I'm in a consortium, actually I'm in an Australian consortium, despite being based in the UK. And we've just submitted an idea to Elon Musk's Carbon X Prize on ocean sequestration of carbon. And really, as Jamie was talking about, it is this wealth of satellite data combined with in situ data and models that give us this view of the oceans, and I would say autonomous vehicles as well, increasingly. And the difficulty sometimes now is phrasing the problem rather than solving the problem, because probably there's some data there, even if you don't know it can be used for that reason. But it's trying to get hold of that data and trying to ask the question of the computers.
So can I add to that? So what I love about net zero from a commercial side is, do you know 90% of global GDP is covered by net zero commitments? And I love to use that to leverage basically the budgets of these large corporations. And I feel as a sector that we are so good at measuring and monitoring. And there's a lot of scientists in the room, and you might, when you look at your data, you're like, there's still gaps, it's not quite perfect, I can keep improving it. But we're running out of time. And so I really want to encourage, particularly with this, particularly with ocean monitoring and carbon sequestration applications, the data is already fantastic. Now let's use the data, make recommendations, and continue iterating and improving it. So what I want to propose and encourage is let's leverage the data and drive recommendations, and let's work with the commercial sector rather than working in grants to build the research to really sell these solutions and make an impact that way.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, it was brought up earlier that we are amassing mountains of data right now. We've got the opportunity through satellite observation to pick up even more data, but that gap seems to be between having the data and then what we do with it to actually make the impact we need to solve the problems you're talking about. So I think that opens up that conversation a little bit more in terms of Does anybody have ideas of what we can be doing with this data to either make improvements, potentially monetize it, start to come up with some solutions, some products and development in that space?
I've got a quick one. I want to ask another question back, which is that you know that as a local authority we have terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data, historic data, all sorts of things. As we want your data to feed into us in a myriad of different ways, everybody I talk to says we need access to what you've got, and you don't make it easy. You make us jump through millions of hoops, etc. I promise you we're trying to fix that at the moment. In fact, I can do better than that. We will fix that, simple as that. What do you need from us whilst we're trying to make things easy for you? What sort of things would people here like to see the council able to give them? Because we have huge, great files, probably by far the biggest in the southwest. What do you need from us?
I guess the starting point is just a list of what you have.
Okay.
Because once we know what you have, actually people will get involved with digitising that data. If they need it, they can potentially get funding from their projects to help you turn that data into a digital form that can then be put into an open standard and served by a computer API that anyone can pull, really. But until we know what exists, we probably don't know what to ask for. And the same as you probably don't know what to ask us for.
That's why these conversations are so useful.
Exactly.
I just want to pick up on a point that Jamie made actually in your presentation, which was that satellite data, it needs ground truthing. And what we mean by that is it can have meaning without that, but it becomes more meaningful if it can have something that's validating or feeding into it on the ground. So to answer your question, Richard, that's where your data will be useful to us as the Earth observation community. If we can get access to everything you've got, it will improve what we're able to give back to you. So it becomes a reciprocal arrangement, as it were.
Spare a few questions.
For me, the one thing that Earth observation could be useful and it isn't really used at all for is raising awareness. So everyone thinks, and we had this point was made earlier on, everyone will tend to focus on the land because that's where we live. We will tend to focus on the atmosphere because we're breathing it. Whereas the ocean often gets to blossom in that process. And so raising the power, I think, one really large power that Earth observation can provide that we're currently ignoring is raising awareness of the plight of the ocean and also why we are so reliant upon that ocean, and so protecting it is really key. And so there are, and all of these data are freely available, and that's really the main reason why the West Coast state resource managers were most interested in our work, was the fact that we can take it to their governors, and they can say these issues are impacting our waters and our people and our businesses, and therefore you really need to do something about this.
I think that's a really good point. I think we've all kind of seen that, you can put up facts and figures and try to make people care, but if you put up a picture, people will care. They can see what that means. And if we can take, like you said, we can take pictures of the problems instead of giving them a booklet of facts, it inspires action not just with the policymakers, but with the public as well, who don't have potentially the academic background to be able to understand the reams of data, but who can understand what they're seeing from a photo of Australia burning satellite pictures. So I think that's a really good point. Gail, sorry.
I just wanted to catch up, Richard. Thank you. That's a very kind commitment. So it's all about action. So I'm hoping James can document this one. Can we have some realistic data when that data is not available?
Yeah, right. Should I grab a mic? It's something we're working on at the moment. This is a new project. We've only obviously come into the council in the last 6 months. It's something we kicked off almost immediately. I would think within the next 2 to 3 years, but I would hope to make that a lot shorter than that. But under promise, over deliver, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really the list really rather than the actual data.
The list. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. We could. What we could rustle something like that up, I would think within a matter of weeks.
Brilliant.
So yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah, because I think with the list, speaking from lots of those hats, if there was a list, then the community could tell you which ones on those lists are priority to us. So if there's certain things that people are waiting to act on and we're essentially or potentially going to be duplicating research, it'd be really nice to know if the data already exists, and then that would maybe help prioritize which bits you're working on.
I will literally make a note of that as soon as I've given the mic away, and I'll get them working on that. But also, I probably have someone in the audience to thank, because a few minutes ago I said I wanted to land the first pasty on the moon. As I sit here, my watch buzz, I've just been invited to judge the World Pasty competition. So I don't know who was listening, but thanks, that's my dream, so thank you.
Can you quite provocative and disagree with your recommendation about the impact of the visual influence in behaviour change? So this sector has been creating data which has informed policy, and you can see that demonstrated in the outcomes of COP. But it was very clear that it's all about delivery now. The world knows that the shit's in it now and we're in trouble. So it's not just about the behaviour change, it is on the action. We need specific steps. What I'm working on at the moment is applying the learnings from other sectors, and they've formed coalitions, and sorry, Sutton, it was a lot of strategy work as well. And what they've done is they've gone to the problem holders, and they want to understand, so they've gone to the problem holders and they want to understand their specific, what they need specifically and the challenges. So you can see the roadmap and you've understood what challenges they have. And our sector really needs to understand specifically what requirements they have. And then on the flip side, we have so much capabilities across the UK and globally as well, and we don't really have a full picture of that. So what I'm proposing is applying learnings from other sectors, mapping our capabilities in partnerships with Space for Climate, Cornwall, and all the different legs. And on the flip side, articulating the challenges of other sectors so we can start bridging the gaps and actually driving it into action.
Yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about monitoring using Earth observation data, and of course monitoring means monitoring stuff that's already happened. And I think we need to move beyond thinking about monitoring the here and now and thinking about forecasting. Some of the things that are happening in the climate might be too far gone to change, so we really need to be thinking about future resilience. How do we adapt to a changing climate? And I think we're sitting on so much data. I mean, coming from an astrophysics background, we think of ourselves as quite data rich, but looking at Earth observation, it's a completely different ballgame because you have so much data, and I think so much is wasted. One of the things that came up in the talk was about resolution. But one of the things we're really starved for in astronomy is resolution. You can't resolve distant galaxies, for example. So we've developed techniques to disentangle what's going on sort of under the hood. When we look at the Earth, you've got tons of resolution. Even the Sentinel-2 imagery, which is 10 meter resolution, you can pull out so much information from that. And I think a consolidated effort to turn the huge archive that we've got into a tool for predicting the future, even if it's a few weeks, a few months, that will enable people to change their actions, behavioural changes, to mitigate the effects of climate change, to change behaviour. And that's, I think, what we need to be thinking about as a community of Earth observation scientists.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. If you look at business, oftentimes you're asked to do different scenarios in terms of if you do this impact, what's the scenario going to be, how's it going to have these outcomes, and do we do enough of that with the historic data we've got to then say, look, if you make this change, if we do this difference, this is what the impact is going to look like in a positive way. We have a lot of scenarios that show all of the cities underwater, but what are the different scenarios of saying, look, if you make this change, if we can do this, this is the impact we can have. So that's a really good point. I do want to try to open it up to the room and some of those private companies. Yeah, got a question there in the corner. Got a mic coming to you.
I'm Brian Woodfield from University. I'm involved with diversity and technology in the metaverse and things like that, which is not really mentioned in this space today. It's also been in a space to the outer space. I disagree. I'll go back to the point about creating empathy and getting things done is through experiencing what is going on. So data is great, it's fantastic, we have loads of data, but if people don't understand the data, can't comprehend what it is or put it in context, they're not interested. If they can appreciate the data in context to what they do with other database bases. Now the virtual world can give you that, so I think there's a real movement that's needed to create a core digital twin and then allow the metaverse to be opened up and then allow people to experience the things that are going on, connect it to the space world, and then we can connect the inner space to the outer space, if that makes sense.
I think with what we were just talking about in terms of being able to look at scenario planning, that's where something like digital twin would be really interesting to be able to literally show people not just in writing, but using VR or other technologies to be able to say that this is what could happen. And like you said, put people in it and help them see it. Doing a lot of work with kids, they can pick stuff up pretty quickly, but you've got to be able to bring it down to their level and give it something tactful. Yeah.
Hi, Laura Castlereads, Digital Cornwall. We are actually, as part of our project, trying to build digital twin of Cornwall. So basically it's geology, hydrology, hydrogeology, space imagery, underground, above ground, on ground, bathymetry, all of that. So if anybody wants to have a chat with us, you're more than welcome to.
Perfect. Awesome. Anyone else want to pitch projects that they're working on that could have contributions today? Got a gentleman just... Yeah.
Hello, Sam Lavender. I'm not going to pitch anything. I'm just interested in the challenge that you're sort of putting out is how can we take a load of data and engage the public with that. And that's a really, really challenging thing to do. I think it's actually unfair to do that. If you want to engage the public and raise awareness, I think probably Cllr do a better job of engaging people in a very real way. So we need to focus on how that data is going to drive policy changes and governmental changes and business changes. So I think just slightly reframing the challenge there, because I spent a lot of my working life taking information to engage the public. It's very, very hard and very, very slow. Rather than that sort of division between Cllr over there and satellites over here, there's very real engagement there. And so let's focus on using that data to change policy.
I think you bring up a good point. We want the public to care about all of these challenges that we're dealing with, but we also do want to inspire innovation. And so we want to be able to think about how can we use this to find new startups, to bring these challenges to those companies, to bring problem solvers to the forefront that can then tackle these problems and come up with real solutions, and businesses that can become from Cornwall and helping to grow that ecosystem. So I think that's a really good point. It's not just about sharing information, it's about inspiration.
Can I answer a... sorry,
Go for it.
Just talk on, I don't want to just sort of dominate this with council-related things, but in the space of how to make data real and accessible and interesting, we're doing a lot of work in the council at the moment with Microsoft Dynamics, and already we're changing a lot of our programs and our presentations over so that we're actually, when we're talking about things in meetings now, because of course Teams integrates with everything brilliantly, you're actually working with live data and live graphs of the things you're talking about. This is something we're really committed to rolling out and making publicly available where we can. You can already come on, and if you look at, I think it's the latest council business plan, just as an example of this. We're not using in any of the fun data ways that all people here are going to be really interested in. But you can look at our business plan, and like each graph is drawn live from the data that's in the system at the moment. And if that data changes, all the graphs and everything change in real time. So I think systems like that we're using, but are of course now rolling out across everywhere, are really going to make these sort of dusty Excel spreadsheets that people are used to much more engaging, visual, and people can then use them and access them to change policy. Because you can go on and say, just a minute, how many people with, I don't know, these socioeconomic characteristics
Going back to the
also,
earlier point, if we can use that to reframe better questions. So asking better questions and trying to understand now what do we do with it. But again, it's about opening that data up to the private sector as well as not just the public sector. Sorry.
Can I just respond to that comment that you just made, Richard? I'm also Richard with here. With Trina. We are based in Duncan, actually, near St. Austin. We are a startup about a year old. We have made an app that geolocates trees using satellite imagery. So you pull out your phone, you look at the satellite image, put the crosshairs on the tree, put a button, and it maps the tree. And then we label the tree, give the user the ability to create labels, and then look at those trees on the map. So super simple, it's not rocket science. But exactly to this point that you make, there's two things. There's these large, grandiose philosophical goals out there. There's also this huge wealth of data. And what we, as a startup, are aiming to do is to connect the average citizen, the man, woman, and child. How many cell phones are there in the world? 3 million? Good. They're so common. We want to use that reality. There are cell phones everywhere. And let people participate in that in a very accessible, easy, and that format. So, for me today, what's super interesting are two things: that there is such data available. We would like to make it possible for people to add data, like map trees, because by far we have not mapped all the trees in the world. Also, we want to make it accessible to people to look at data. But our app makes it interesting. We let people attach their names, their pictures, content to those virtual trees. So today, it's fascinating to me that the data is there. Also, what a fantastic opportunity. There are these space organizations that are looking for ways to sell the idea that space is useful. Come and talk to us. We use satellite imagery to make the point that we can absolutely preserve trees by mapping them and labeling using what your satellites are doing. I think it's a value bridge, so that's what we do. Come and talk to us.
Can I just fire back one thing on? Actually, I love this. It sparks everyone's imagination so much. But I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is that what we're all thinking of doing with the data isn't going to be probably the big things that change the world. It's when people can get on and use it themselves. It's the little inventors tinkering away at home. They're the ones who are going to come up with the really big, earth-shattering ideas. I'm always reminded of, I think it was Thomas J. Watson, the founder of IBM, who in 1950 said, I can see applications for perhaps 5, maybe as many as 10 computers in the world. And you just think, what? And that's the underlying beauty of this data. People will pull out and they will compare trees to something else that none of us would ever have thought about. So we've got to make it available to people so that people like yourselves, people that we've never even heard of, and people in school right now can start using that data, and they'll be the ones really driving this in the future.
We've got...
You're just going to shout out.
Sorry, if you have a mic, you need to talk.
Thank you for this. My name is Phil Johnston from Paris. What we do is we're looking to develop floating offshore wind within the region. There's in 15 years' time we're looking to get 4 gigawatts of power coming from offshore installations 50 miles northwest of Cornwall. Quick note on data, before I get to the challenge to pose to you, is I think we're drowning in data. The big data for me is on 1,000 hard drives. It is the questions that you ask of it. That's the key thing. So how am I taking data? In terms of the challenge we have is we're looking to cite, industrial level sort of oceanic platforms out there for which we need to know more about the marine environment. We've started on that looking at campaigns for geospheres and environment, but we're also looking, we've talked to a couple of companies represented here today, for more interesting ways of getting it, and also specifically with a low carbon approach. So I think what we're hearing today is great, but we're very interested to hear more about what we can draw out of the use of space to get ocean data to inform what is going to be a huge significant industry.
I think it's really interesting. We keep talking about all this data. I'm just curious, you know, in your talk earlier, you mentioned how you guys are starting to use AI a little bit. But remarkably, we hadn't used the word AI very much today. We've used data a lot, but nobody's talking about the fact that we've all got these skills that we're all developing around AI capabilities and what we can do with that. And I don't know if you want to speak on that a bit.
Frankly, AI is, I shouldn't say just, it's just an enabler. So what that means is it's a tool, just as data is a tool. And we always think about our phones, our mobile phones, to talk about how we don't really know what's going on inside that phone, and everyone just knows that it works and it does what we want it to do. Eventually, all these questions that we're talking about today, that will be the nature of things. I like to think we won't be having this conversation in 10 years' time, necessarily, because it will just be second nature that this kind of thing's happening. The problem with big data that was just identified then, that's where AI comes in as an enabler to make sure that you're getting value out of that big data stack.
Definitely, and I know there's a couple of companies that are in the audience right now that are working in the AI space, so I think that's another exciting element for Cornwall, is bringing those two different things together, like you said, bringing the tools together to enable the action on the data. Cool. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. I'm Nikki Davies. I'm one of the directors of Software Cornwall, and we look after the tech cluster in Cornwall. We've got around 80 to 100 member companies. And awesome to hear your pledge, Richard. Obviously, we met a couple of weeks ago as well. And really, really great actually making that data available. And the spirit of Gail's point earlier, we've got end of February for the list, but with 6,000 people in council, how does the tech community and all those solution providers and everyone in the room, what is the practicality of actually going, okay, now we get that list, how do we engage with the council? How do the council make sure that they're providing the data in a way the community can access it? It's probably a lot of granular detail, but just interested in sort of, you know, how we go away from today and actually take action.
I don't want to hog a panel that I'm not actually even a member of. I think that's a little bit mad about that. But we'll, as I say, what we're doing at the moment, currently the council holds its data on, I think, something like 350 different databases. Some of it's still on Excel spreadsheets on people's computers. This is dreadful, and we need to change that. We're changing that at the moment. That's why we're doing our huge IT project to streamline everything. At the point we've actually got that, at the moment, getting your data will be find out where on earth it is, pull it out. It's going to be a nightmare. As we're creating this new IT project, as part of that, we'll be creating the infrastructure for you to do that. But since we haven't created it yet, it's a little bit early for me to tell you, I'm afraid. But I'm really taking up too much people's time. Someone else answer a question, quick. Go.
I'll just say, you're just as bad as other places. I've been to places in the world where I ask for some data and someone opens the file cabinet and gives me a stack of paper, and then I have to scan with my phone the bits I want to take away.
We're not quite that bad.
So, again, yeah, I know you've been really popular, our kind of guest appearance. I'm kind of sorry, I jumped over. But do we have any questions for some of the other panel members or some ideas on how we can help some of the other challenges?
Stand up, so I'm right at the back. I'm not very tall. Hi, I'm Maddie Constance. I work for Geoscience Limited. We're a geoscience consultancy based in Cornwall. We have provided geology services to Eton Geothermal and the United Downs Deep Geothermal Power Project. Our focus is on providing geothermal for low carbon heat in Cornwall and the UK and globally, but especially for the UK and Cornwall, since it accounts for 50% of our energy demand and a third of our greenhouse gases. The majority of that stems from industry and space heating. So what we're currently focusing on is a project through Deep Digital Cornwall, who are here today and who spoke earlier, to help us better understand the data to inform feasibilities of geothermal for these low carbon heat projects. So we're currently leading a project to better to update and define the heat flow map of Cornwall through Deep Digital Cornwall with the help of Cornish Lithium as well. And part of this process that we're currently working on is the data compilation of all heat flow data across Cornwall. This is going to be incorporated in maps. We'll then look at where the gaps are in the data and look to incorporate additional data, perhaps through drilling and new boreholes and temperature measurements, which we'll conduct in-house ourselves. As part of this, we'll be looking at where the gaps are in relation to heat demand. So what I'd like to ask of everyone today is if anybody has any up-to-date heat demand data and carbon emission data from industries and space heating, particularly for Cornwall, please come and speak to us, because this is a really important part of this process. And honestly, geothermal has such a significant role to play in decarbonising our heat in Cornwall and the UK. So please come and have a chat. And I know Cornwall Council had previously done a heat assessment, which we are aware of and have those files available. And this sort of data, heat demand, has been assessed across the UK, but we're looking for Cornwall specifically at the moment. So if anybody does have any data that would be beneficial to this study, please come and have a chat. It's going to be really beneficial to future studies and feasibilities for geothermal. Thank you.